All right, so wedge 0 it is. So let's drop back out of our full screen thing here. And we can go pop back into our regular camera. And we don't need to view our wedge view anymore. Although it would be cool to render the whole city being destroyed, but that could be for another time. So there's not really much to change. We can control which wedge we're going to render from our control panel in here. Which we used to have up there, but I guess I lost that. So let's bring that back. Control panel, there it is. So we can control which thing we have here with the current wedge. This is, of course, wedge 0, the one that we liked. But we'll just load up whichever one we like here. We could compare them in place now instead of right next to each other also if you wanted to do that. But I'm satisfied with this. So the way this sim ends, actually, is this kind of falls off to the side here. And I think it would be cool to move the camera maybe to kind of reflect that for our final, let's say, a render camera. So I'm going to go to our instance low business here. And I'm going to say, let's display this as just centroids for now, because we'll still get more or less the idea of where everything is, as you can see. So I'm going to move back. I'm going to move over here maybe. Let's make that camera, lock it, so that now when we move, we're moving that. So I just want to make sure that the last frame looks good. First frame looks good. And it looks like it still has the top visible there a little bit. Something like that. Great. So we'll call that cam render. Something like that. Great. So what else do we need? We're going to want to actually have like a ground plane for when we render. We're going to want to have like our shadows show up and whatnot. So just make any kind of grid here. Rotate it maybe so that it's facing us. We can move it over. If we're lucky, from the camera angle that we chose, maybe we can stretch it into infinity, but it looks like it does eventually get back there. Instead, let's make it like this. Maybe make it a little bit longer. And we'll kind of curve it up in the back. So I'm going to make it longer in this direction. Move it away. Let's go in here. And while we're in here, actually, we might as well... Oh, looks like that, our construction plane got weird. So we can go to... See how it's all warped and weird now? It's kind of crazy. If that ever happens, you can go to Set Construction Plane, revert to defaults, and you can see it comes back. Weird. Anyway, let's make this like a NURBS type. Because with NURBS, it'll be smooth. Instead of having it be very stiff and polygonal. As I move these points back here, it'll kind of have this kind of bent look to it. And that's kind of what we want. So I'm going to say, make a soft radius, like we'll bring it up. So that way, as we move this, it'll kind of move that too. Something like that. Let's see, does that suffice? All right, we're getting close. And then let's just make it a little bit wider. Oops. Good. So now we have, we're not going to have any like black in the distance. And it looks like all the points, all the pieces more or less land. I mean, it looks like some of them go back there, but, who cares? We're not going to see them anyway. Great. What else do we need? We need an actual renderer. So let's go back over to our out area, drop down a mantra node. We have our camera. Let me get rid of that. We have the camera we just made, cam render. So make sure it's using that one. We're going to want to do the full frame range, 1 to 120, as we have it. The render thing here is fine. I mean, I don't like to use hipname and OS. So I'm just going to call it like output, something really cool like that. Version 0. F4 means it's going to be the current frame, but with a padding of up to 4 digits. The rendering engine, ray tracing is fine. I mean, I usually put physically based ray tracing to make myself feel better. They're almost the same. And that one sounds cooler anyway, so I might as well choose that one. Definitely do not do micropolygon anything, because that will break our instancing stuff. It will not work, so take my word for it. Get rid of candidate objects, and let's force on our grid and the sim So just drag them both there like that. Oops. Put them in force objects. That means that it will render them no matter whether they're actually on or not in the viewport. It'll always render them. Great. I turned allow motion blur on because we definitely want that. And let's also make kind of a take. And if you recall from my Pyro lessons, the takes are kind of collections of things, like of parameter overrides. In my case, I want to say, hey, when you render this, make sure that you render it with these high resolution geometries that we made. So, because I don't want to wait for it to load them, I'm actually going to manual here, and then I'm going to say 1. So as you can see, it filled it out here. In the render take, set that switch to 1, which is this input, which is the high resolution geometry. But otherwise, when I'm in the regular one, and you can see here, it says 1, go back to main, it's back to 0. That way we don't have to deal with the high resolution stuff while we're, flying around the viewport here. We'll just, when we're rendering it like overnight or something, then it can deal with the high res stuff. Okay, so that's probably just about everything we need to do. The only other thing I would say is for motion blur like this, where it's the V and W attributes, we need to go to render sampling and turn on geometry velocity blur. If we're not using geometry velocity blur, that means if these geometry nodes out here were moving like based on some kind of keyframe stuff, then it would get the motion blur. But because the actual velocity and angular velocity were already calculated in here, we have to turn on that so-called geometry velocity blur. And there they are, V and W. Although this node here is responsible for the movement of our pieces because we copy over the transform pivot in position. We'll actually also need to copy over the angular velocity and velocity because as it stands here, we're only doing the first frame. So actually we won't get any motion blur as it stands here. So let's just skip this variable assignment stuff. We'll just say, hey, make a V vector where you import the V attribute, and we want to do the same for W. And now, this should be happy. Now, as you would expect, we'll actually have V's and W's that move because we're copying them in from the animation stream on the right there. So of course, there they go, they're moving. I mean, sometimes they're not moving because they're on the ground or something, or they're just in the building form. Okay, so that's certainly enough things that merits a test. I'm going to save it.